This is the Quality Grind podcast presented by Medvacon. Conversations that go beyond compliance. Sharing insights geared toward helping you navigate the everyday grind of regulated life science industries. Here are your hosts, Joe Toscano and Mike Kent.
Welcome back to The Grind, everyone. Well, I think Ray hit the nail on the head in part 3. Having a solid relationship with all your partners, whether they be development partners, cogs in your supply chain, or anyone else who's helping you fulfill the needs of your organization, success really starts and ends with clearly understanding and agreeing on who's going to do what, how, why, and to what level of expectation. We round out our series on cell and gene therapy in part 4, where we identify strategies for implementing quality systems and a compliance mindset across the development lifecycle. Now, Ray has a bit of a different approach to this, and I think you'll find it very pragmatic and even refreshing. And to me, that's why it's effective and sustainable. We conclude the episode with a look forward to the exciting future of this dynamic genre of life sciences. So let's rejoin the conversation with Ray, Joe, and me in part 4 of Cell and Gene Therapy here on The Grind.
So one more critical area for you, because I really think we hit some really great points, right? Things people need to be cognizant of, look out for. Again, people in industry are going to know this, but there's a lot of people looking into it or new to it, right? So hopefully a lot of this is helpful. It gives a different perspective on approach. But then I go to the last thing, quality and compliance, right? How do you build that in early? How do organizations ensure that they're getting that foundation in place? Because as we know, that comes back to bite people in later stages in a very big and very expensive way. You know, what are your thoughts or recommendations about how organizations can implement that process early?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's going to be. I've come in where we've had too many people in a quality
careful.
organization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I have more quality people than I actually do have in manufacturing and QC, that's probably there. It's either a really big red flag that I've got a lot of problems and I haven't figured things out, or we're usually offside. That's telling me our processes are really not being adopted by the individuals that should be using it. It doesn't mean that I have bad people. It probably means I do have bad processes because we're having to augment a lot of people with bad processes typically. So when I first come in, so you're asking, like, when I come into an organization and I'm the guy at the top, of course I'm going to look at the balance of my organization because it tells me where a lot of problems sit just because how people are utilized, how my organization probably will run, where the issues are there. So like when we start seeing where do you balance it? But I've also come in late stage companies and they're trying to manage it with 2 or 3 people. I can tell you, there is not enough time in the day for that to happen and be effective, right? And you can outsource to whoever you want to outsource. That is not an effective model when you start getting towards those submissions to commercialization and whatever. The internal quality systems still have to be run even in a virtual company, right? You still have the other side of the business. You still have oversight requirements that may be outside of the internal requirements of your virtual company. Okay, so there's different skill sets and trades that are actually utilized in what you're looking at. So to have too little is the same thing. So what it comes down to is I've always looked at this. I try to grow quality based on the needs of the business. And I may have a large quality group in an early phase company because I have something that's later stage and something that's early stage. And the amount of work that's going into the early stage clinical does require quality support. And in early piece, sometimes it gets overlooked. And it has the regulatory interface with quality there. And that gets overlooked as well as, do I have a good clinical regulatory and quality regulatory setup that's going to feed us into the later piece? They're almost separate jobs sometimes. Because when I get back to the other,
important, though.
yeah, because if I'm manufacturing for clinic, but I'm also manufacturing potentially for PPQ or moving into the other portion, that's a full-time job that it's not going to go away anytime soon. And it's just going to continue to build as I make more lots, right? And this one right here is sort of hit and miss, but the demands in some of the earlier ones are quite different than demands in some of the later programs. But you still have to do change management. You still have to understand, the revisions and the protocols. We still have to have, say, clinical material supply. We still have to release things. We still have to, all those things are still there. They may not be sitting in that realm right now because that realm is going off to start focusing on commercial supply a little bit, and you'll start seeing that. So it depends on the stage, but you're gonna build it. I know you can contract some of these roles because they may not be full-time roles. So you could have clinical quality as a contract. You can find very good consultants to do this work. I could do it partial time and a great well. I've seen it early phase companies, even at times, have some of their heads of quality or contractors, right? But what they're going to have to do though is somebody in that organization still has responsibility for quality because a consultant doesn't, right? So you've got to map that and understand, well, that if they're taking the charge in your CMC team and all that, is understanding and following things they're putting in. They're all quality players in a virtual company. They're quality players in their own stand-up company. That just the roles could be a little bit different in a virtual piece because you have more of an oversight angle where you're more of the executor and a commercial side or and your ownership side.
Right.
So you have the ability to potentially have a little bit of a hybrid piece there, but again, they still have to be trained. They still have to have a role. They still have to have a reporting structure. So they can carry quality in an oversight position a little differently because, they're actually doing oversight when they go in and watch somebody manufacture, right? So they better have their quality hat on, but they have to have their technical hat on, right? So they can do a dual role. When I'm supervising, I got to have my quality hat on when I'm doing that. When I'm supposed to be exercising, I'm an operator. I'm supposed to have both. It's just a little bit easier when I'm on the outside looking in and I'm observing than when I'm right there in the middle of things to realize what's right in front of me, right? It's the whole, when you're right in the middle of it, you miss the obvious. Right. When you're outside in the periphery, you can start seeing the train wreck coming. And it's much easier to go like that. You've got one or two choices, right? You can either nudge the guy beside him, hey, watch this. Or you say, oh, hey, have you guys ever thought about? And usually that changes. And usually that changes where it is. So I guess it's whether or not they like you or not. It's whether they let the train wreck happen. But the reality is people want to come to work every day and do a great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not only that, they want to be good at what they do, but they also want to have good relationships with people. So the reality is most of those individuals always choose the right thing. And when you have individuals who choose not to, they just told you that they don't want to be on your bus.
Right.
It makes it very easy.
Right.
And again, they self-select. You rarely have to actually fire somebody in our industry. They usually fire themselves.
Right. No, understood. And I don't want to bring up the next piece because Mike will get very excited and, I'm going to need to temper that.
Never. When do I ever get anything excited about it?
Well, you know exactly where I'm going. Yeah. The importance of training and even talent acquisition. And Mike, you're not allowed to speak.
Wow. There goes the fun part of the podcast, right?
No, again, I know it's a passion of yours. So, but it is important, right? I mean, the training aspect, throughout the various phases, regardless of the type of organization, a lot of people do it to check a box, right? Mike and I have this conversation all the time, but it's a shame because it's such a lost opportunity. Talk about the importance of training and the impact that it has, and good training, not just, let's meet our yearly GMP. Everybody sit in the room and, read a bunch of stuff and then we can all check the box.
I know you said I couldn't speak, but that's the first check in the process, right? I mean, how you set up that environment and the expectations around training.
Right.
Make a huge difference as to how it gets executed.
Yeah, and this is also a tricky one to answer, right? And I put it this way.
Don't worry. No.
Yeah. It's a.
Yeah. So here's the thing that over the years I've struggled with, right? I've had large training organizations, and they've been successful and not so successful. I've had super small training organizations, and they've kicked the pants off my larger training organizations. organizations, right? It's the elements of training and understanding, and then how can we roll it out and execute, put the importance. It's like you were saying, what's the importance around it, right? Um, at the site level, when I'm talking with anybody, whether it's a site head or department head or whatever else, what they would always hear, and they'll always hear today, even in the other side when I'm working on the technical piece, is we do things safely, correctly, on time, every time, in that order, and non-negotiable, right? Yeah. And that really comes down to, I just gave you cardinal rules, right? Safely and correctly and on time. Those are the things we're going to do, but you never ever put a person or patients in harm's way, right? You're always going to do the right thing. And damn it, go do something, right? You're going to do it, right? That really requires guidance, organization, and training. So training now becomes essential for you to do it safely, correctly, on time, every time. Right. And if you're following that and you're thinking about from a compliance aspect, well, if I can't do this on time, right, what's my gap? And that's where the operational discipline comes in. And that's where the guidance from the leader starts. It's thou will do those things to train your people. If they don't know how to do it, is it a process issue or is it a people issue? If they're not trained at first, it's a process issue. If it continues to not get fixed, it becomes a people issue because you're not fixing your process, right? So we understand trying to put that in. Well, how do you get that as part of the integration? When I'm fully commercial, it's so much actually easier than when I'm starting to start from scratch and build it, right? When I already have something in an SOP and a training history and somebody knows how to do that, well, it is around putting a process, qualifications, standards, work standards. Sometimes it's training a process and then forcing people to do it a few times. And then that actually starts to take off. Right. And that's why I could have a smaller team, sometimes just kick these large teams because the ownership gets put down into the SME level and they help with these SMEs maintain the records and everything else. And these guys train you to a standard. And then they fill out that, they turn it in, and that guy helps them out. And then these large groups may come down and say, well, I'm going to teach you how to gown. When was the last time you actually worked on the manufacturing floor? Because, man, you barely could put that shoe cover on because your balance is the way it's like say. But back to the thing is it's a delicate balance. But there has to be a mandate, and that mandate does have to start with something like I look at it safely, correctly, on time, every time. And it made it easy because it's to me, I just tell the guys, it's a cardinal rule. That's it. If you do something and you violate safety, that's probably your last day working here. If you do something and you knowingly violate compliance, it's probably your last day working here. Again, I also know that mistakes happen. So things do happen. But again, if we're not paying attention, you probably don't want to work in this industry. Right. Our industry is very serious about what we do. Right? I'm signing my name in a badge record because I said I did that step, which means it may have a weight and a balance, which means I would expect that you did that weight, balance, checked it, saw it, and whoever has the verified by it was right there or actually took it and verified the weight again. One way or the other, there better be a verification, either through observation or physical check, because it's a verified by. Just because you got it out the door, if you don't follow that step, that is a serious issue, not just from a GMP perspective, but now I'm just giving you a card. This is what I tell the people. This is what my expectation. So when you start with an expectation of compliance, but you also say there's no, just because I have to be compliant and safe doesn't mean it's an excuse not to do the job. And that's pretty much what I'm telling you. We'll find a way. And that's it. Find a way. And that's where now my entrepreneurial people, my go-getters, people that actually love what they're doing, they start to come out of the woodwork and they start to show you ways to be very efficient, effective, consistent, putting those into procedures, fixing your processes. And you can go from a couple hundred in our controlled deviations 1 year to a multi-billion-dollar vaccine process down to 3 in an entire year, right? Because of the people, not because of the leadership. I give them guidance, but then they took it and we worked together to figure out how we're going to flush out bad processes and make people effective. Right. Okay. And that's it. So I think it's a hard thing to answer because I can tell you, do I have to have, 50 training people? No, I have to have at least a training mentality and a dedication to doing it right. I will tell you that earlier I can have somebody looking at some of these systems, the better off it is. And when I'm in a commercialized state, I've got to have somebody that's responsible for training. I've always found that out. Is if I look at it and say, well, you six people are responsible, no one's responsible.
Right.
And that's what I've found. So,
And I agree. You need a point person, or, in large organizations, it's a department. But I think where there's a failure point sometimes, and, where we would be called in to help because it's a failure point, is that person responsible doesn't know how to conduct training, right?
Yeah.
They're not very good at showing, and demonstrating and teaching, right? Not everybody's a good teacher. A lot of people know how to do something, but they don't know how to demonstrate it well.
so
They
there's
may
a
not
difference
even
between a
want
trainer.
to.
Yeah. But to me, there's a difference between a trainer and a process,
Right.
Right.
right? Um, the best processes yield the best results for training.
Right.
So I can have a trainer on every shift and multiple trainers on every shift. But if I don't have a process that feeds the right training material,
Yep.
how to train that piece,
I agree.
record it, how to do it, what's my piece to cross reference it. More importantly, this was a thing that I remember, was over a decade ago, having a conversation.
It goes quick, doesn't
Yeah, I
it?
was saying, having a conversation around, well, how do you know the guy that's getting ready to work on those batch record steps is trained on everything that's in there? What's your printouts look like? How they match to your batch records? Well, and this is just basic operations, right? But again, process, right? What allows the supervisor to truly know they are up to date to the latest compliance? Okay, we can laugh more about it today because the way technology has gotten so good. I mean, I can have these things integrated to iPads tied to all my systems and all that. Right? I didn't have that, 12, 14, 15 years ago for sure. Right? I had a system. I had to go out, print it out, and check on things individually. But now we're technology is enabling us to be a lot more compliant with data and information. But again, I still have to have a process. We still have to be able to set it up. I still have to be able to train somebody to be effective, right? So that again, I look at it, if I have nobody in charge of training, there's nobody in charge of training specifically, which means I can put 10 people there. It's probably not going to be effective. I need to have that centralized point, which does give me that. And again, if I bring a consultant group in or somebody else in to establish that piece, there's fine with doing that, but somebody still has to have ownership to maintain it,
Absolutely.
or it's going to eventually fall apart. But the process itself drives good training.
Right.
And not everybody can train. They want to train, but not everybody can train. It's okay. It's not a failure. I don't tell somebody, well, if you can't train, then you can't be at this level.
Right.
Now, if you're not a good trainer, don't train people.
Don't
No.
put that individual in that spot in the
Yeah,
boss.
exactly.
Even I'm a manager, therefore I should be expected to, but
Not if you don't know how to do it.
exact, or you don't want to do
Do
it.
it.
I've had scientists that get promoted into leadership managerial roles and they'll sit there and they'll fail, not because they're not brilliant, by the way, but it's because that's not what they want to do. The other piece of it, I know you told me I wasn't allowed to talk. Okay. But the other piece, and you brought it up, Ray, so I feel compelled to jump in, right? I'm a co-host on this podcast too, right? That's what the title says.
I just know how much you
I
love
know.
this topic.
So I'll keep it brief, but the piece that I think comes out of your comment about the technology. We can have access to information anywhere at any time under any circumstance. Because there's a record in a system somewhere and a checkbox next to it doesn't mean the individual is not competent now in that moment. So that's where I think that incompetency has technique and capability, but it also has an element of decision making as a part of that. So along the lines of training, I'm curious from your perspective, where and how you've been successful throughout your career influencing individuals to when push comes to shove. This doesn't feel right. I know I'm supposed to, or I think I have a question, I have a concern. doing the right thing and making the best decision in the moment.
Mhm.
What in your mind is leadership's role? How do you create that environment where people are compelled to make the right, best decision,
Mm. even
even though it may be the most difficult thing for them to do in the moment?
So this is where the HR professionals have to shut off and we can go from there. No,
Click.
So what it comes into, and I mean, just in the last company that I ran, the first thing when I came out and I was talking to the entire team that first week I was there, I said, listen, in our organization, we only hire fully developed adults. And what does that mean? It means we don't have to tell you what's right and wrong when you need to be at work, when you should go on break. We don't need to tell you that you need to train on something before you do it.
Right.
You're an adult. We're going to hold you accountable. If we're babysitting, you're not going to work here. So first is I have to empower people to be people, right? And let them know I expect you to make decisions and look at a process. The second thing is I like to give things like first, especially for site design, simple things like the cardinal rule, like safely, correctly, on time, every time.
Right.
If you don't feel like you can do that, you have a compliancy stop, you have a safety stop, you elevate that, you talk through that issue. And people, when they start to use it and they're not punished for using it, right?
Yeah.
The next thing you know, it's, oh, we're going to fix this problem and we can talk about it. Well, I really can't do this because I can't get this to vent off. Well, I'm glad you called and didn't just try to take the thing off because it was 10 pounds of pressure on an 800-pound tank.
Right.
That would blow that sight glass through the ceiling, right? As long as you're not in front of it, we'll laugh about it later, right? But it's going to be a big hole. So the good news is they'll stop. They ask the question, I can't get it to do this. I can't get this to cycle off. But rather than just thinking, oh, I can just crack that to go on. No, they stopped, right? They made an adult decision in my mind, right? You did what you should do. If you're acting like a fully developed adult, you look at it and say, well, that's not safe. Why would I do that? Okay. And it's not pushing at all costs and not doing that and just being a drone. You can't be in our organization.
Right.
If you listen to anything that you have from compliance talks and all that, they expect people to be able to understand what they're doing in their jobs, right? And that's training. That's the competency piece we're talking about. But first, it also starts with making sure you're looking for and bringing in people who want to do that type of work. So as we start looking at those, there are two things that people hear me say a lot. The third thing is it's really around forcing leaders to understand their role and making sure their employees are successful. And some of that is just looking at simple things like metrics, right? So when I look at deviations and then classifying deviations a little bit differently, is it in my control? Is it not in my control? And if it's in my control, what about it's in my control? Oh, well, the batch record was wrong. Guess what? That's in our control deviation. There's no reason we should have a deviation for a bad batch record. That means it's either poor planning, didn't understand it, different process change, whatever it is. But it's in our control. How do I eliminate those? I got to do RCA. And once you start doing human factoring on in our control deviations and you start looking at the processes that are leading up to it, a lot of times it is process driven more than it is people driven. Yes. They make bad decisions and bad processes. Okay. So now I'm back to hopefully we're thinking about human controls based on doing RCA that we put in place by looking at human factoring issues and those types of compliance, which drives the safely, correctly, on time model, right? You make a mistake, hopefully you learn from it. If you bring a mistake up, there's things where if you're concerned about employees not wanting to report things, for that's a deviation, whether you want to call it an amnesty thing or not. No, I looked at it a different way. Some people would do it that way. I said, well, it's actually the other way around. I hire fully developed adults. So if something's not right and you're not acting as a fully developed adult and reporting it, okay, I can't have you in my organization. That's where we look at it. So I look at it actually a little bit differently. Where I was like, well, I don't want to say anything. No, then you're not a person in our organization, and it's okay to say something, and it's okay to say something to say it was you, Joe, and Joe, I saw this and this didn't look right. Let's talk about it, and then let's go talk about it with the suit. This is what happened. Yeah, you can't be a punishment environment. It needs to be a discussion. People make mistakes. It's going to happen. And sometimes at 2:00 in the morning, you hit that spot. You may not realize you're writing your name sideways on the paper until an hour later when you look at it and go, man, did I write that? You hit that stage, and hopefully your buddy beside you saw you there and ushered you out and said, you need to go take a break because you're at a point where you're tired because your body's natural rhythms, they're off. It happens in off shift. I don't care what anybody says. You see it. And it's not always the same person at the same time. But when it hits, somebody can have a bad moment, right? Even on a day shift, you've been working there on and off for 8 hours. You can hit a little spot where you're just sort of from the controller, right? Just didn't hit the button right away. And the other person say, hey, why don't you come in and break? That's being buddies, but it's also you now self-reflecting and trying to figure out how to stay out of that. Are you working through it? Then having that discussion, because that's, again, the supervisory piece is rotating people through. It's keeping them fresh. It's understanding your teams. That's the human factoring elements that aren't in play when you start seeing those things going, right? That's bad process and management leads to poor decisions. Okay. So again, looking at human factoring a lot, giving some rules and guidance, which just allows me to basically preach, right? And, same thing. I tell people, our industry doesn't fire them. They usually self-select eventually, and they fire themselves if they want to get fired, right? But a lot of people really don't get fired. They usually quit. But the reality is, doing a few of those things, they usually decide very quickly that that's not the business they want to be in. And that's okay. It's not for everybody. I don't judge. If you looked at it, you decided this is not for you, that's fine.
That's about being a fully developed adult and making that realization and decision for yourself. And okay. And
yeah. I mean, it's the same thing.
And that is aligned.
And and that's where I would tell people, especially as I've gotten higher in executive roles, even some of my senior leaders, where they get into it, is you can see if they're not happy. You'd be like, you'd have those conversations. Is this really what you want to be doing?
Right.
Because if it's not, then let's talk about what you want to be doing. And it could be another seat on the bus in the business, or it could be that it's not the right bus. Well, if that's the case, then we both need to be responsible about the discussion, right? And that gets us back to, maybe we have to make a change. But the reality is usually you have that discussion. It's usually something very simple, and they're right back in the seat they were supposed to be in.
Right.
But if you don't ask, you don't get any information.
No, understood. So one last question for you, if you don't mind. To me, viral vector, cell and gene therapy, exciting area, right? I mean, look what's just happened in the last 7 or 8 years in that marketplace. Where do you see it going? I mean, what gets you excited about this space, the innovation that we're seeing in regards to it? What do you see the future as being?
I can't tell you where it's going to go, but I can tell you what I feel like it's going to do, in that I'm seeing different types of drug products coming out that can cure very specific things, or in some cases of other things, there's, hundreds of mutations that lead to this outcome. And now they figured out, well, you can't treat 100 of these things, but I can treat the outcome. And now companies are looking at it from that sense, right? How can I take somebody who might be handicapped for life or something like this, or what have you, or maybe there's many mutations that lead to this lack of protein somewhere, but it creates this health issue. I can treat the health issue, and I can treat with a gene therapy. You may not have solved the problem and cured that disease per se, because there's still a mutation there, but you can keep that person's quality of life or extend their life greatly, right? By just treating that. So I think you're going to see more of this. I think you're going to see a lot more. There's going to probably be some platform designs that come out in the next decade that we never thought of. How can you deliver something like mRNA differently, right? And I mean, can you do it and deliver it in a different manner, which allows it to actually be effective, right away, and then disperse appropriately, right? Do you have to do some of these therapies today, they're talking about editing versus, and replacing things, and the body does it that way. Or even, I'm giving it a cold, right? Giving it a virus, and I insert some stuff. Next thing I create that protein that way. Do I get away from viral type work, right? Do we get away from different types of administrations because we find out the reactions to the body? I think some of it's to be seen. It's definitely not an exact science. There's more about it. I remember when I first started stem cells back in 2011. First time being in there, I was talking to the chief scientific officer and the head of development, and we're doing the stem cell, and we're finding the clinical result was interesting, and that people with strokes were recovering much quicker. And I asked, well, what do you think causes that to happen in the cell? And the chief scientific officer smiled at me. He says, well, if I knew that, we might be the only 3 people in the world that knows the answer.
Wow.
The reason I don't have it is because we weren't advanced enough in that assay,
Right.
and that science. But it's not that people weren't looking. This cell had been around for quite some time. Right. So it's now back to what does it really mean, and how is our industry moving? So I think our analytical capabilities will continue to grow, and I think we'll see some innovation come out. What cell and gene brings out is a lot of entrepreneurial type people. It is small classifications. I can treat this. I can do these types of things. But what it also brings is an opportunity for potentially platforms and a drug delivery piece. There's more discussions around. We potentially have ways now to potentially get past, the blood-brain barrier per se, right? How can I actually dose appropriately where I need these things? You look at something like the theory of something like Lilly's Alzheimer's drug, right? In theory, if it became a vaccine and I could give you that, and I could clean plaque out every 5 years, and you have that piece, that would be an incredible opportunity. Well, right now it's not that way, right? It's I think a catheter injection piece.
Right.
It does have a lot of risk to it, but the reality is, it's well understood. But just taking that and saying, well, if they could actually make that more like this, and then understand how to restore memory, because right now it stops, right? We're seeing some products that, like, say, they cure, but we see a lot of things. We do see products that restore, right? But we also see, like, this product, it stops the movement. But if you've lost a little bit, then you've lost a little bit. Then that's where I'm hoping that gene therapy will be better tomorrow than it is today. That they'll understand a lot more of that. They'll be able to analyze those things. We'll have more history, patient history. I still haven't seen, an eyeball or appear on somebody's forehead. So, but we have had deaths, right? Because we've had things that did not react well.
Right.
I think some of the things, there are still things about our business that are very scary, right? That can create that type of an outcome. But there are also a lot of things that, we laugh about because, again, I can't imagine that I could grow an eyeball on my forehead, but we laugh about it because it just doesn't make sense to us.
Register. Yeah.
Right. But there's some very real risks to what we do in our industry.
Yeah.
And we see that. So I think it'll continue to grow. I think we'll continue to understand those things that have occurred, those risks. I think I go back to this. So you can't put a value on time. As I think about it, as I get older, I would like to think that, I can extend my time, but, you can't put the value to it. What you lose is what you lose. Right. So it's the biggest thing here is, I think that's an opportunity. It may also lead to other breakthroughs. I don't know how AI is going to play, but there's an opportunity.
Oh, there's a huge one.
We can aggregate stuff and do all this, and we could spend hours on that thing too. But the reality is, you're going to see science, technology, new pieces come in on how we're going to utilize the newer technologies in our science.
Right.
And I'm excited about the next 10 years. Yeah. Biggest thing is how we're going to fund it, how we're going to do it, how we maintain some of the infrastructure that we have, but we have to break some of the old ways of doing things and look at newer newer ways of thinking sometimes.
And I think the most exciting areas here, right, are really for those populations that sometimes it was difficult to manufacture products for because they were small, especially rare diseases. And there's been so many great inroads there for treating some of those populations that before they might have been too small to really have companies make big investments in regards to trying to find, a way to help those individuals. There's just been so many cool innovations in regards to treating some of those, patients and individuals where it restores hope for people that are dealing with difficult situations, right? So, but Ray, this has been great. I mean, as always, love talking to you. We always have great conversations whenever we do get together, and this was no different. But can't thank you enough for spending some time with us and being on your podcast, and hopefully you had some fun with it.
I always do. I always love talking with you, gentlemen. Well, thank you for having me. Again, it's an honor to be able to sit and talk to people about things.
Yeah.
I look at it. We've got so much more to do. Yet today might be a drug that helps you see. Tomorrow might be a drug that keeps you from having heart attacks. I mean, it's the same thing. I'm excited about what we do in our industry. But again, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
But if you're a problem solver, that's why you sort of end up here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But that's what makes it fun. But also what drives you is to keep moving those things forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We really had a great time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, we certainly hope you've enjoyed this 4-part series on cell and gene therapy. We here at the Quality Grind podcast would like to thank Ray Kaczmarek for sharing his time, experiences, and perspectives on so many aspects of this emerging field, and for being kind enough to meet us on location to have this tremendous conversation. We'd also like to thank the good folks at the Courtyard by Marriott Mission Valley in San Diego for hosting us to record these episodes. And last but certainly not least, we'd like to thank all of you for listening and or watching. Your support and feedback allow us to continue bringing you these discussions with experts from across the life sciences landscape. So from all of us to all of you, again, thank you very much. And we'll see you again next time here on The Grind.
If Medvacon can help you and your organization, we're happy to do so. We specialize in the following areas: quality and compliance, validation and qualification services, project management, tech transfers, general and specialized training programs, engineering services, and talent acquisition. If you have general questions as well, feel free to give us a call at any time. We can easily be reached at 833-633-8226 or via our website at www.medvacon.com. Thanks so much, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Grind podcast, presented by Medvacon. To learn more or to hear additional episodes, visit us at www.medvacon.com.